And you'll immediately see that green is for value adding as far as the patient is concerned. Yellow is necessary but not directly value adding, and green is value adding. And in almost every workpiece patient process, the actual value adding is a small percentage of the total journey. This depiction of the inverted triangle with the customers, clients, patients at the top of the triangle is more apt than ever as we're now working remotely. The frontline service providers are in touch with those customers, and the senior execs are remote and yet trying to manage the process. Now, you need to understand that Radiant Law has working from home in its DNA, and Alex will tell the broader story of that. For now, I'm going to talk about the co-learning that led to the online coaching of remote teams. We now have remote teams updating the cutter boards via their own Zoom meeting prior to being coached by a senior manager. And we also have coaching of frontline teams and executives happening remotely. How did this co-learning journey start? Well, in late July 2018, thereafter there's been 12 to 16 hours per month on site. And I must state that what I've seen in this co-learning partnership is relentless leadership with clarity of purpose from within Radiant Law, not to be underestimated. What we've seen is steady exploration and experimentation to strengthen continuous improvement in the work and the systems of Radiant Law. A relatively significant event was a visit by the staff of Radiant Law to Halfway Toyota in Ottery in June last year, where they could see a mature, lean organization using value stream mapping, standard work, visual management boards throughout the organization, on the workshop floor through to the administration. Some very significant events over the last 6 months, which Alex will talk about in greater detail. Significant stabilizing in work in the last 3 months of last year. Over the last 6 months, significant progress in understanding the data and analyzing the data and merely having the data. And finally, the cutter concepts introduced in a practical way in January with the key rallying cry of get the team to own the work. So just to give you a brief taste of Mike Rother's approach to the cutter. On the one hand, we have the leaders of an organization strategizing, setting the vision, but also setting a challenge for about a year out, and then management executing in the context of the challenge, identifying the current condition, the next target condition for a team, beginning to work on what are the obstacles that lie between the current condition and the next target condition, and in that way, bringing about improvements on the trajectory towards the challenge. This is how he depicts the rather higgledy-piggledy journey. Set the challenge, identify the current condition, set the target condition with a date of, let's say, 4 to 8 weeks ahead, experiment your way to overcome obstacles and make progress. This is also a significant thing. The book Toyota Cutter and this so-called learner's storyboard, and this you will recognize is the board structure that Radiant Law adopted for their adoption of Cutter. The coaching element of the Cutter is based on these 5 questions. What is the target condition? What is the actual condition? At this point, turning over the card and saying, what was the last step you planned? What did you expect would happen? What actually happened? What did you learn? Coming back to what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching your target condition? Which one are you addressing now? What is your next step? What do you expect? How quickly can we go and see what we've learned from taking that step? This is a timeline of the partnership between Leah and Radiant Law this year. The kata game was played by all staff late January. Immediately, the team began setting up their own kata boards, and coaching began within 2 weeks of being introduced to the game. They moved offices at the end of February and immediately set up the boards again using these Klingon sheets, and coaching being undertaken. On the 10th of March, the management decided preemptively to close the office and begin to work with everyone remotely. The national close down happened 17 days later, but by then the remote working for Radiant Law was fully in place, and the last coaching happened on Thursday of last week. So here is day one, the first day of setting up the kata boards in the new office. And this is a kind of quick and dirty setup, being coached, the team leader being coached by the executive. This is the initial kata visual management board. Here was later in the same day, each of the client teams setting up its own visual management board and getting ready to be coached. So here is a 5th of March, a visual management board for kata. The close down happened 5 days later. Everyone thereafter works remotely. Here is a photograph of my laptop screen on Thursday last week. The participants, the executive coach, the team leader, myself, the members of the team, all able to see this now digital kata board. And later in the day, the executive coaching taking place with more detailed data and a discussion about what next. This is a slide of Alex Hamilton's, and he will talk to it and the next slide starting now. Over to you, Alex.
Great, thank you, Norman. I feel a bit strange doing this session right now. I think maybe a lot of people on this call have the experience of feeling perpetually like Grasshopper in some Kung Fu film. When it comes to lean, where unless you're called Toyota and at least 85 years old, you basically feel like you hardly know anything. But it's been a fantastic experience working with Norman and Sam and the team, trying to bring lean into Radiant. And it's a topic that's always been kind of close to our heart, you know, since we started 9 years ago, and always something that kind of informed what we thought, but, you know, we knew nothing, frankly, until we met Norman, and then my depths of ignorance just became more and more apparent day by day. But anyway, I'll share with you what I can in terms of the experience of this. And I wanted to start with this triangle, which came from a brilliant book by Robert Keidel called Seeing Organizational Patterns, which when I discovered this triangle in this book last year, I suddenly went, oh my God, that explains exactly what we've been trying to do for Radiant since we launched. And to kind of understand what Radiant is, go back 10 years. So 10 years last September ago, I was a junior partner at a very large, now the second largest in the world, law firm, specializing in technology and outsourcing deals and so on. It was actually quite a dangerous combination in law. And I had a true Jerry Maguire moment. I wrote a memo to the executive committee of this successful law firm suggesting that just maybe we might even contemplate doing some of this innovation stuff. We might look at things like whether it really makes sense for everything to be charged at an hourly rate. And we might look at how we work. And I didn't get fired for this, but it was pretty clear that the law firm had very little interest in having this discussion. And quite understandably, actually ignored me, given that they went on to become the second largest law firm in the world and one of the most profitable on the planet. So they did brilliantly by ignoring me. But by this point, I'd already kind of started to believe my own bullshit and set up Radiant Law in 2011, convinced we need a different way. So we specialize in commercial contracts. We work from Cape Town for companies like Sky, where we do all the content on Sky, licensing and commissioning it. We work for the London Stock Exchange doing its global market data contracts. We do logistics for UPS. We do companies like Go Cardless, Rentokil, Serco, and so on. So we're working with large companies with their day-to-day contracts. When I started the firm, I really started it with two strong convictions, purposes, if you will. One is that the contracting process, the way in which companies enter into relationships, commercial relationships with other companies, is deeply broken in really interesting ways. And I think the legal profession has a lot to answer for perpetuating that brokenness. And the second was that, I'm not sure how many people here have close working experience with law firms, but law firms are partnerships that are terribly conservative. All the interesting people tend to get driven out by about the time that they're fifth year, or the kind of the free thinkers. They optimize for people who tend to be highly autonomous. They, whilst, you make a lot of money as a partner, I don't think are terribly happy places to work. And I felt quite strongly that we maybe could build an organization that worked a little bit differently, that might be a home for people who weren't so inclined in their incentives. So we started Radiant 9 years ago, and I think it's fair to say that it took about 7 or 8 years to even have a base to work on where we could really absorb lean. We started, like, the one holy cow at Radiant is we don't have timesheets. We don't charge by the hour. We only charge on a fixed price basis agreed in advance. And the reason for that is I come back to Charlie Munger's great quote, partner of Warren Buffett, who said, never ever think about anything else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. And I really do believe that until you can set up an organization where people are incentivized to cooperate and so on, then you just won't get the behaviors that you might want in the lean-like organization. So I think it took us about 7 years to really build an organization that was stable, worked, and could really absorb lean. So we kind of taken concepts like continuous improvement very close to our heart. Start with the client's needs as the first of our values. These are all very lean concepts, but we were slow in doing it. So the reason I wanted to show you this triangle was, a lot of companies, I think, have traditionally operated in the bottom left-hand corner. And what Robert Keidel's saying with this triangle is that there are playoffs, and that although in different scenarios you'll choose different places, you can't be in the center of this triangle. You've got to bias one way or the other. And all of the design decisions you make about your organization will bias towards one of these corners. And that traditionally most companies are biased towards bottom left, if I dare say so. South Africa is a pretty hierarchical, high-power, distant society. It's been an interesting experience for me as an Englishman, operating here with a team where I keep saying, you're free, we're running a flat organization, and they keep going, that's great, now tell me what my career path is and who I report to. So it's culturally been quite difficult here to do a flat organization, but we are very much up in the top in the cooperation. And there are playoffs when you do that, right? So for example, and law firms are bottom right. Partnerships are all about the autonomy of the partners. If you're an associate in a law firm, you're very much in the control corner, but otherwise you're in autonomy. So we moved into the cooperation one, and getting our incentives right and so on meant things like having no timesheets. We don't give individual bonuses to everyone. We just pay everyone a flat bonus every year based on the percentage of their salary. We have low controls on what people do. We are very flat. We push decision-making down to the team. And so the stuff I'm going to talk about remote working and then so on very much needs to be looked at in that context, that I think you need to, if you want to make remote working work, you probably are going to be very uncomfortable if you operate from coming from the control corner, because you will lose control. And if you're coming from the autonomy corner, it can be quite tricky too, because people will disappear off into different directions and you'll have even less influence over them. But if you're biasing towards cooperation, then I think remote working is almost a no-brainer. We went kind of remote working in London from about 4 years ago, and in Cape Town, we've had an office. Our position on the office has been for at least the last 5 years, I think it's been now, that we really would like to see you on Mondays and Thursdays, but otherwise you can work from wherever you want. And so kind of a few things we've done to kind of make that work. First of all, we're very focused on outputs as an organization rather than inputs. We, like I said, we don't keep timesheets. When we ask people to kind of show us how much time they've spent on different aspects of the firm, just to have a vague sense of profitability and so on, we do it as a percentage of their time rather than absolute hours. So they could work 3 hours a day or 20 hours a day and it would still come out as 100% for the month. But we do know how many matters anyone's pulled, and so that's what we do is we don't give work to people. People take work out of a stack on the system we built ourselves. And we do have a pretty good idea of how they're delivering and so on. So we kind of measure outputs, and our perspective has always been, rather than telling you rather than measuring you whether you turned up on time, left on time, or whatever, I really don't care what time of day you do your work and so on. Your best work, apart from, I'll come back to it, half-day turnarounds. What I do care about is you're knocking matters out and clients are happy. The second thing we learned was that you have to, if you are measuring outputs, be very cautious about that. There's a wonderful law called Campbell's law, which basically says that as soon as you start using a metric to actually measure how people perform, then they will start distorting how it's measured and their own performance. And so although we are output rather than input focused, we are very cautious about putting too much weight on metrics. So I have a pretty good idea of, who's pulling their weight and so on within the organization, but I don't drill into it too far or spend too much time on it, because it tends to lead to kind of overly competitive and not necessarily very constructive approaches. The second thing that's really important with us is our systems for collaboration. We've been using video conferencing for a long time now, and it became a rule last year whenever you're dealing with me that it was always video on. When I spoke to the team members, we switched to the also trendy Zoom from Skype for Business last year, but we've been using Skype for Business for many years before that. One of the things that happens with remote working is that there needs to be a lot more communication, and your communication systems matter. So we introduced Slack, which is a messaging system like Teams and Microsoft, in 2014. There's been a rule since then that you're not allowed to send an email internally. The only time you can send me an email is when you're forwarding it on from an external party. And all communication has to go through Slack. We've also actually run 2 IT systems, rather weirdly. Internally, externally, because we're lawyers, we deal with contracts, you have to live in Word and Outlook. I mean, you could use Gmail, but you definitely need Word. So we run Office 365, and I should say all of our systems are cloud only, and they have been ever since we started in 2011, which means that we can work from everywhere, and everyone has a remote, as a laptop rather than a desktop. So all messages are via Slack internally, and we've integrated other systems with Slack so that it's all kind of in one place. There is a problem with Slack or Teams, which is you get too much bloody communication. So kind of picking up the phone is a good thing as well. But that's been pretty important. And the other aspect of our IT systems is that putting aside Office, we choose all of our systems based on collaboration. So they're all designed for online collaboration. So systems like Trello or Google Apps with Google Docs, Google Sheets, and so on mean that everyone can work on it, work on something at the same time, which is very important in remote working. We also are very strongly a written culture. Although it was really important to pick up the phone and talk to people, picking up the phone, it's better to have video on than not. We spend a lot of time trying to capture what we do in one place. So we are big users of a wiki. We use MediaWiki, which is the engine behind Wikipedia. So we use that as, kind of, you ever speak to me, it's like I'm always at some point in the conversation going, is that on the wiki? Is it on the wiki? And so we have an incredible repository of all the information you need about the firm and so on in one place, which is again a system which is strong in collaboration and low on control, right? Anyone can change the wiki. There are no constraints on anyone changing the wiki at Radiant Bull. So that makes some people breathe in sharply. Norman wanted me to comment on this slide, the Harvard Business School slide. I frankly slightly struggle with Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business School stuff because it always seems to be very neat and very rarely terribly useful outputs. I think these things all make sense to me as all true, but I think we're in extraordinary time right now. So if you're experiencing remote working with your whole team right now, this is not how normal remote working feels like. Especially, we had that kind of twice a week touch point of people meeting each other. That was very important. Obviously, we can't do that now. The thing that really jumps out for me is what's different right now is the team members are pretty scared. And I think people are finding it quite tough at home, quite lonely at home. This is a stressful situation, and we've got a lot of young team members in our team. So, we've been putting a huge focus on just making contact on a daily basis. So we have a call going on every morning when we haven't got an all hands meeting where anyone can join for 15 minutes and just talk nonsense, which is popular. We've had kind of virtual drinks. I reach out and try to talk to every team member for 15 minutes about just nonsense, at least every week or two. So it's kind of a much bigger emphasis on communication and so on. My experience is that generally remote working is a lot more productive, not less productive than coming into an office every day. And kind of if you want to get real work done, you're much better off at home and doing that kind of long, uninterrupted, deep thinking time. So yeah, this is an unusual time because I think it is true that probably productivity dropped. And if, Norman, have you got the next slide? Oh, can you jump back to the chart? So one more. There we go. Thank you. So no, the bar chart. So just talking a little bit more about the lean journey that we've been on with Norman. Sorry, Norman, one more slide, please. No, the other way. Other way. The bar chart. I'm looking for the bar chart, Norman. Yes, thank you. Okay. So I feel extraordinarily lucky having got Norman taking you through the timeline we've been on, extraordinarily lucky at the fact that the shutdown happened when it did. Because we kind of had a breakthrough moment working with Norman where everything was like slow, fast. It took a long time for the team to really start to get their heads around what Lean's about. And I think that might tell you quite a lot about lawyers. I suspect nurses are a lot faster at picking this stuff up, but there you go. So The team, I feel like, has really started to get there recently, though, and we had a lot of things coming together from, we build a lot of our own systems. I've got like 6 software developers around the world, as well as a team in Cape Town. And you asked me questions about how to run a remote software team, if you like, as well, after this. And so what the systems we've been doing have been giving us a lot more data, and we've had a data analyst come in. And what you're seeing here is the results of our challenge we set as leadership, which was that 75% of our matters would be turned around in half a day, which means a contract is drafted, or a contract, markup back from the other side is sent back again in half a day after it's received, which is, I'd like to say, pretty bloody fast for lawyers and law firms. And certainly when I talk to in-house teams who would, legal teams, they wouldn't be able to do typically the 2-day turnaround that's now industry standard. We've just brought down to half day. So what you're seeing here is a chart of bars are how many matters were dealt with that day. This is a daily chart that's updated daily. And the whole team has access to this, as well as a breakdown at the account level for clients. And of those matters that came in, both new and returning matters, how many were turned around in half a day? The black line is the percentage. The challenge was to get this quarter in, by the end of this last quarter, at 75%. And if you look at there, we pretty much did it, which is amazing. And, going to the nearer point that Norman talked about, I feel like for the first time we've come into stability. You'll see that there was a dip that happened between kind of the beginning of March and now, which was really what happened is we went to fully remote working, and at exactly the same time we went back into load shedding. So that was unfortunate. That kind of threw us off. But what was really extraordinary is the concept of a measurement like this, plus new working practices we've introduced about how we work, has meant that we really haven't missed a beat going from the office to fully remote working. And so this kind of structure of reporting and just keeping an eye on stuff, and the team focused on a number like this, made a huge difference. We didn't actually have a lot more data a lot more matters in January. The reason why those numbers are so high was our data was so broken. So that's been kind of another experience we've gone through. You build systems which start to capture data, and then you start analyzing it, and you realize that most of the data is rubbish, that actually it's not being updated properly, and then you keep fixing it, and then you start to enter the new world. So I'm going to stop there. We can open up for questions.
Alex and Norman, I don't have any questions yet.
Hi, let me just put my video on. Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I am an ex-lawyer and recently transitioned into the software industry, and I'm in the agile world. And yeah, Norman and I know each other because I tried to start a lean legal coffee at Cliff Decker, which was obviously one of the more traditional law firms. So my question is, I know your process comes to, you talk about managers, and then you talk about kind of leaders. Then you kind of talk about like executive level training and coaching. So I just want to get a little bit more of an understanding on how that works. Do you kind of train your like senior associates, or what kind of like training and coaching do you give to the team?
Cool, good question. Okay, so yeah, we look a bit weird on the inside. So we don't have partners, we're run as a company. The executive team consists of 4 individuals who are on the management team. We're about 35 people in total at the firm. And the executive team that Norman's referring to would be myself and Ian, who runs delivery and the Cape Town office. He works with us. The structure within the team is we don't really have a hierarchy of partners or associates or anything. We just have people who help with delivery. And within that, people have different leadership roles and different hats they wear. So we have the basic concept is lots of accounts for these kind of day-to-day contracts. So there'll be a Sky account or a London Stock Exchange account or a rent account. An individual, a lawyer, would be responsible for that account. They call the account lead. There'll be someone there who's responsible for kind of intake and process improvements, therefore the process lead. And then there would be a bunch of individuals who'd be working on particular matters. And individuals will work across multiple accounts. So they might be helping with delivery on one account, but also running another account. So everyone kind of reports to each other, and we don't really have a hierarchy of seniority beyond, in a particular situation, you have someone has a leadership role. And we try to give everyone in the firm leadership roles in different areas, like go run this project or go lead this thing, even if you're newly qualified, right? And we all kind of report to different people, including me, depending on the context. So in that, the cycle that Norman was describing, if you go back a couple of slides, Norman, to that picture of Ian and the glass, yeah, if you jump back, keep going, yeah, there. So on that top left-hand picture, what you've got is you've got Nicola, who is the process lead on the London Stock Exchange account, talking to Ian on the right, who is the head of South Africa, although he looks about 12, and delivery. And then you've got a bunch of lawyers who are team members. And so Nicola is effectively in that role, the account lead. She was actually just standing in for someone, but the account lead. But then she might easily be working for another account lead on a different account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That's great. And it's also really interesting that you don't assign work, that team members can just help themselves to work. Does that system work fine? I mean, do some people help themselves to more work than is necessary? I mean, does it kind of just work itself out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So people love it, even though it is kind of open to all sorts of abuse. And Norman and I have been having a 2-year debate on this, but like all debates with Norman, I always end up losing. So where we've come out on it is that I'm just slow, right? It takes me quite a long time to get his point, but I get there eventually. So what we've done effectively is introduce a bunch of rules about how you pull work and how you should do things in different points in the day. And what those rules effectively mean is we balance the load between all the team members in a pretty effective way. What we've also done is we've probably trebled productivity in the firm in the last 6 months with the moves we've been making with Lean, which is kind of extraordinary but true. And so what we found is we've now got a huge amount of capacity in the team compared to what we had before with the same volumes and the same number of people. So that's kind of wonderful to invest in other stuff, but it also means that we've got to keep all these people busy doing firm improving projects and other continuous improvement stuff.
Thank you.
Rebecca,
Thank you.
Perhaps I could just make a comment there, because your question was about training people in coaching. I overheard a conversation between Alex and somebody else in the firm, a very junior, relatively new person. And he said, no one will ever lose their job in this firm through working themselves out of a job. And what he's working at all the time is continuous improvement that releases people to work on continuous improvement rather than working directly on matters. So that kind of conversation is an extraordinarily empowering feature. And Ian, as the coach in this picture, has also adopted a way of working that, whilst clear about purpose and clear about the challenge and the target condition, is essentially creating a safe space for people to talk about what they're trying, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And it's really been quite recent that there's been no defensiveness. Thursday last week, I thought was an extraordinarily profound example of conversations between Ian and 4 different teams in which the team lead had previously met with their team remotely, updated the visual management board, now digital, and got ready for the conversation with Ian. And there's something about the cooperation culture of this business that has established the kinds of relationships that are making this thing very productive. And I think that that must be, if you're not in touch with the frustration about what Alex is talking about, then you haven't really understood that the transition to remote working didn't happen during March. It's been part of the DNA of the company, with people working 3 days out of 5 from home for years, with the development of systems behind that. Yeah, but their culture has allowed people to be good with each other, and for managers to develop a supportive and challenging approach to improvements.
Alex, I have a question for you. How do you deal with matters that need specialists, given that people allocate work to themselves?
Yeah, so we do day-to-day contracts for clients, and so although we've done billion-pound deals and so on, and that was kind of my background, the vast majority of what we're doing is fundamentally either knocking out all the day-to-day licensing terms or service terms or sale of goods terms or whatever for a company, which means that if you're on a team supporting that account, you probably can do pretty much any matter on that account, and it's not hugely specialized, and all of our stuff is commercial contracts. So we have an advantage of a lower level of variance than you might find in other situations. But we've also driven a lot of variance out of the way we do things, because we for example, there's no contract radiant law that's not automated in its creation, right? We have a team in Romania who just automate contracts so that you can answer some question that generates a tailored version of it. So similarly, we have playbooks for all of the contracts we negotiate, which keep being updated with kind of what fallbacks and so on we can take in negotiations. So there's been a huge effort to drive the variance out, and as someone whose background was, wouldn't get out of bed for less than, kind of £100 million deal, back when I was a partner at Latham & Watkins, my old firm. The reality is that the vast majority of what lawyers do is capable of being standardized and made into standard work. It's just lawyers are artists who don't really like to believe that, and like to make things complex, if I may say so. Does that answer your question?
Perhaps I can also comment on that, going back to the value stream map, if I can find it. There's a QA line. So the delivery agent the lawyer working on the actual contract can refer the matter to a colleague for specialist input or just checking out. And they have recently started talking about pulling the and-on cord. So like a Toyota production line worker saying, hey, I need help on this. And within the structure, that has become more and more accessible to individuals.
Norman, Alex, to what extent do structure or script to what extent do you structure or script your meetings? Sorry. Is this always based on Carter, or is there some other script or structure?
So right now, it's very structured with Ian using the card that Norman showed. And it, you know, the whole point about kata is developing muscle memory. And I think that's what we're doing right now. And I imagine in time, it will become more fluid. But I think we found this incredibly helpful to keep using these cards. But we're really early stage on this. You know, I made my grasshopper comment at the beginning, and I wasn't kidding. I don't know where we'll end up on this.
And Alex, after the lockdown, will you go back to having an office? Or are you at the point where remote working is here to stay?
Such a good question. I don't know. We rented this office for 3 years now, the new one, and that feels about right. And I'm normally based in London, but I'm happily enjoying living in Camps Bay during this lockdown. South Africa is a pretty good place compared to the incompetence of the UK in dealing with this fiasco we're all dealing with. And the reason I was down here was working with a team to get this half-day turnaround in place. And it reminded me, because I kind of work in London, I'm either meeting clients or I'm working out of my bedroom, or I've got a hot desk at a WeWork and so on. It's quite lonely, this remote working. And I really was enjoying having those 2 days a week where I knew I'd see everyone, and then I would always go into the office and people might come in or might not during that period I was here. And I think that social side is really important. So I think we will always have some kind of physical space, a hub where people can meet up. And, you know, it's pretty flexible space, our new space now. The architect kept getting confused when we said there wasn't a manager's desk, and they were like, no, but seriously, where does the foreman sit? And we were like, no, we don't really do that. So it's all very open plan and so on. But I think we will always have a physical space we meet in, but it maybe eventually it becomes subject to how we handle confidential conversations, both client confidentiality and also internal confidentiality. It may be a shared space with others. I don't know.
Thank you. Alex, how do you measure customer satisfaction, and what is the feedback from your customers on your increased productivity?
So customer satisfaction is an interesting one. We do an NPS score, Net Promoter Score. At the end of every matter, an email automatically gets sent to the business user at the client. And we have numbers that pretty consistently around 55 on the NPS score, which is measured between -100 and +100. So that's kind of one way of doing it. We have a lot of qualitative stuff. So we have people who are separate from the delivery teams, so in marketing and so on, who will have in-depth conversations on a quarterly basis with clients to get feedback. So every 6 months we get clients to get feedback. And we also have like a lot of conversations. We have a role called the client relationship manager, who will be having conversations with client on a regular basis, plus governance meetings. So a lot of different ways. So that's how we get the feedback from the clients. You know, it can be quite frustrating, because, you know, our first principle is kind of start with the customer's needs, and it can be quite bloody hard to extract them and get feedback from clients, but we just kind of keep pushing on that, and eventually, you know, they'll let slip something that actually be helpful for them when we rush off to build it. So that's how we do it. So there was a second part to the question. What was the second part?
What is the feedback? What is the feedback from customers on your increased productivity?
They couldn't care less, because we're fixed price. So we bank the productivity improvement. What they're seeing is faster turnaround time. So we've brought down from a 2-day service level, which is considered pretty good in the industry. It's kind of about the best in class. We brought it down to 75% at half day, which means on average it's about 3/4 of a day on average across all of the matters. I mean, and that's a great user experience from the business user's perspective. So that's been kind of, that's what they've noticed and what they're liking. But as a side effect of that's given us the productivity improvement.
If I can tell
halve the stress as well. Interesting. Sorry.
I want to tell a tale out of school, something that came up on one of the coaching calls last Thursday that you were not in on, was one of the delivery agents expressing some frustration that one of her clients had more or less communicated, if you could get it back to me in half a day, I don't think you've given it enough attention. So, you know, if you spent 2 days on it, you probably were working very hard on it, but not understanding what's happening.
Well, that's kind of a fundamental problem in law, where it can be perceived that the act of lawyering is the creation of value, and the more lawyering you do, the more value you've added. I'm not sure the rest of the world perceives it that way, but lawyers do. What can I say?
Could I go back to that question about the structure of the coaching sessions, the structuring of those kata meetings? The initial part of the meeting, Ian, is very structured around these questions, and the team leader is responding to them knowing that they're coming. There are no surprises. And Ian has developed, I think, a very nice capacity to then broaden the conversation. So having gone through the formal part, having a broader conversation around what's being experienced and what opportunities are being seen and what the obstacles in general are. And then right at the end of the call, they always turn to me and say, what have you got to say? So there is a structure of very structured for the first part, then a broader discussion, and then finally some comments from the external coach, as it were.
Thank you, Norman. Alex, this is a bit of a long one, so let me know if you got it all. So let's accept that we have 18 months of significant change until we have a vaccine available. How would you go about dealing with the loss of physical social contact in a world in which social distancing becomes an 18-month norm? What do you think the standard work for dealing with long-term social isolation looks like?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't really have a very good answer for it. I think we're in new territory here, and it's going to be a hell of a challenge. I mean, one aspect to it is in the business world, you know, Radiant is supporting clients in the US and UK and Europe and so on, and Japan and what have you, doing deals around the world from Cape Town. And, you know, we've had a challenge getting a lot of more conservative buyers of legal services to go, actually, you can support from Cape Town these kind of deals just fine. And, you know, what we discovered is, hey, guess what? A lot of people, turns out, can work from home, and a lot of the barriers to working from home were caused by perhaps slightly overly officious bosses with their one venture. And so I think there's going to be much more increased acceptance that the way Radiant works and delivers services is a good way of working, and I think will be a long-term helpful for us in that way. But your particular point about social contact is really bothering me, and I think it's going to be incredibly tough, because I think humans are social animals, and we need that intimacy, and we need to see each other physically. You know, I think there is a video helps a lot, but there is a kind of a slight cognitive dissonance that goes along when we can see people on video and we can talk to them, but we're not actually there with them. That means it's not as good. And I don't know what the answer is to your question, but it's a valuable one to have raised.
I just want to quickly build on those last two questions, also about clients and also this long-term social distancing. So even before we went into this, I'm sure many of your client meetings were remote as well. I mean, you operate internationally. So I know that a lot of clients are also conservative in their approaches, and that they want, face-to-face meetings. They want those consultations. So have you seen that your clients are kind of open to operating remotely? And when you kind of get their feedback, what is their take, and how often do they actually come into your office for these consultations?
Yeah, so we've noticed anyway a big shift that's been going on over the last 5 years, where our clients don't want to see us any longer. And people are actually avoiding meeting in person anyway, right? So negotiations have moved on to email and calls anyway. The in-face stuff is less and less frequent. And I've been working with banks who can be conservative in a lot of ways, but one bank I work with since '99 had definitely moved all their deals onto calls 10 years ago, right? So that there had already been that trend. And what we had was clients would want to come in and see the London office just to make sure that we exist. And then that was it, they were done. And then when we moved to a WeWorks in London, they just came in, just wanted to see what WeWorks would look like. It was a bit trendy, and then they were done. So that's already been happening with, I think, in the business world. But what was harder was to get people to go who had their own team of in-house lawyers and were considering whether to use us to enhance that team, or to whether to hire another person themselves. There's been, I think, a reluctance by a lot of managers to let go and not have someone sit in the corner so they can check that they rolled up at 9 o'clock in the morning and haven't left before 5, right? And that led to a culture of presenteeism, I felt. It didn't actually lead to better teamwork or more productivity, but it meant a great reluctance in accepting or contemplating alternative ways of delivery that didn't have the, you shift from being able to poke a body, make sure that they're doing something, to, well, let us show you on a live dashboard what the outcomes are, what the metrics are, all the rest of it. And I think this jolt we're going through globally, which is, obviously horrific in so many ways, I do hope that it will have a slight silver lining to it of suddenly getting people to go, actually, wow, it's amazing what you can do with Teams or Slack or Zoom or Skype for Business or whatever, right? Actually having better data and, being able to work myself in shorts, is quite a nice experience. And hopefully the world will grow up a little bit about what successful work looks like and what you need to do as a manager.
Alex, I'm from Halfway Group. We are incredibly lucky to have just rolled out Salesforce. We have an online business which for the last 10 years has operated fairly normally due to the ease of communication and teamwork. To me, communication is critical when working remotely.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Salesforce is, like the granddaddy of software as a service cloud systems, which are essential to make this work. So, I think a lot of companies may have been going through a challenge of, they had their own, servers, they have their own systems, they have a lot of desktop computers and so on. I think this is an excellent time to consider software as a service, SaaS, like Salesforce, across all your systems, which generally, now way better than proprietary older systems that people have been using that are installed locally and so on. And the point about communication is so right. You can't over communicate anywhere in business, and it becomes so much more important now. But it also becomes, I think, important that we have an opportunity with this remote working to let people do good work. And I think one of the challenges of being in an office is the constant interruption. And, I'm haunted by an essay written by a guy called Paul Graham, who set up Y Combinator, the dot-com accelerator in the Valley. and who set up Hacker News. He wrote an essay called Manager's Schedule, Maker's Schedule, where he pointed out that managers can think in units of an hour and meetings of an hour and whatever. I know we're moving towards 15 minutes these days, but still, you have a predictable diary. It's just finding a slot. But if you're in creative work, then you think in units of half a day, and even a 2-minute interruption during that can blow the flow of doing that creative work. And I think a lot of work has been dominated by managers and managers' schedule, and they want to make sure that people are doing things. So all they do is interrupt and get in the way of people trying to do good work. And so, although communication is super important, when you communicate is also super important. Moving to more asynchronous communication can be very valuable, and giving people time to do their work and not bothering them during that time is also incredibly important. So the secret behind how Radiant got to half-day turnarounds is we cleared our diaries for two-hour slots during the day when there's no internal communication, and we ignore everything from clients, and people are able to just do good work before they go back into calls, meetings, and so on. And those cleared spaces allow people to get better work done faster with less stress, and that's how we've done the half-day thing. So yes to communication, yes to cloud products, but don't communicate all day long and bother your team members.
Thank you, Alex. Does anyone have any further questions? I haven't received anything more. I think that's it.
Okay, thanks, Sam. I'm just going to point out, these are some of the slides right at the end, showing you the resources. There's plenty out there. You'll see here a slide about the benefits of working remotely, which comes from 2019, before the lockdown. Working from any location is no longer an option. You work from home. Other offerings from the Lean Institute, we'll be doing another webinar probably in 2 weeks' time on double loop PDCA being used to design your own daily management system.
Norman, that's next week. Next week.
Is it next week?
Next week, Tuesday, yeah.
Oh, great, excellent. Our Lean Management Development Program has now also got quite a lot of online stuff. We do A3 problem solving support online. As you can see, Kata implementation support, online or face-to-face coaching. There are some things which we haven't worked out how to do remotely, like the rapid improvement workshops. We can be involved in lean learning clusters. I just want to say thanks very much to Alex for being prepared to spend time on this webinar today and being so open about how they have worked and developed to this stage. And thank you to all of you for your joining us today. Everyone's pretty frantic, and I really appreciate that. I hope that it's been a contributor to your journey yourselves, and we will meet again. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Norman. Norman, if you just want to stay online, and Alex.